This is Self-Care-ish, a podcast where we talk about divorce, dating, choosing not to date, and saying yes to the things you've been scared to indulge in and no in a way that won't get you ostracized by society. The goal for this series is to defy some of the social stigmas and hurdles people face when they make a bold decision, whether it's to leave a relationship, quit a job, or even being brave enough to tell friends and family no when you're at capacity and you need time for you. And who am I? I'm Megan Lonergan. I've been a columnist and copywriter for over a decade, and I'm also a newly separated co-parent. And if there's one thing I love more than anything, it's meeting people where they're at. And where you're at is probably busy, most likely multitasking while you're listening to this. So with no further ado, it's time to get self-care-ish. Hi, welcome back to Self-Care-ish, the podcast where we encourage putting your own oxygen mask on first so you can give everyone else on the plane assistance as your metaphorical jumbo jet navigates the turbulences of life. This is an episode for single people, or the recently separated people. The people who might be dipping their pinky toes back into the dating pool after meeting their exes the old-fashioned way, aka not on dating apps. So what I'm saying is you may have gotten married in the time before Hinge, and now you're having to face it alone in the wilderness. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I am going to start this episode by positing this question to you. How do you date? Seriously. What is your dating style? Do you even have a dating style? Or do you just kind of wing it according to who's showing interest at the time? Or are you more strategic? And do you like to think of dating as a numbers game where if you match with enough people, go on enough dates, somehow you will eventually land on go and score your one true love? That sounds pretty good, not gonna lie. But it's not without its pitfalls. First of all, you've got to have a damn good memory if you're going to juggle all those dates. I mean, I can barely remember my mother's mobile phone number off the top of my head half the time, let alone the likes and dislikes of multiple people. Like recently, honestly, I fucked up and I mentioned to some guy on Hinge, "Oh my God, I saw you went to Iran. How was that?" And it was actually the wrong guy. So, nightmare. And for the men, let's be real. You are going to be shelling out some serious cash on dinners and cocktails to keep your ladies happy. And for the women, I guess you've got to keep up tan, nails, outfit. And that's just me. So I don't know what it's like for you out there, but it's a lot. And I realize I'm talking from a very cisgender, heteronormative angle here. But I think it is a pretty universal concept across all people who are single to ponder the issues when it comes to dating. Straight, LGBTQI, we're all just out here looking for our unicorns, so we all have that in common. But are our hearts designed to navigate the endless scroll of sexual access that dating apps provide? I am not the first person to ponder this. I am not the last person to ponder this, but it is something I have been pondering. I mean, for people like me, they are a godsend. I'm an introvert. I work from home, largely in my pajamas all day, and I'm grateful for that. But let's be real, you are never going to catch me at the club, unless the club is hosting like a Netflix and chill night. And as for my dream man, my ideal match is probably at home right now after finishing work and binge watching The Office after ordering takeout. But seriously, actually, speaking of Netflix, I do feel like being on a dating app is kind of like scrolling through Netflix and having endless options of shows and movies to watch and then kind of giving up because you can't commit to anything because there's just too much choice out there. And I love choice, but hedonistic short-term relationships does not intimacy make. They're fun for a while, I'm not going to lie. I live for that first 3 months. You know, that period where everything is sexy and nobody's farted in bed yet. Like, I love that time. But then if the relationship ends, it can feel you leaving empty. Kind of like a cycle that hasn't quite completed, or like when you finish the first season of a show you just started binging and you love it and then you realize it got cancelled after one season. There's a lot of Netflix references in this episode. A little insight into my life at the moment. And to top it all off, if you're multiple dating, you got to keep your little game a secret from all parties involved. Because if your romantic house of cards comes tumbling down, you'll be left with nothing but a bunch of pissed off people and a whole lot of explaining to do. So good luck with that one, Casanovas. But all of the above, that is my own bias creeping in. Don't worry, I know. Because I am late 30s. I met my ex-husband prior to dating apps. And now I am re-entering the dating app pool armed only with my sexiest selfies and my conditioning from dating in a world prior to Instagram, Hinge, Tinder, Bumble, Raya, etc. It's a whole new world with a whole new bunch of rules. Prior to this episode, I operated on Hinge in a very, inverted commas, traditional way. I use the pause button pretty liberally, especially after making a few matches. I only go on a date once I'm almost 100% certain that I'm fully interested in someone. Like that in itself is practically old school by today's standards. And then I had my eyes opened. So I matched with this guy in the usual way. And we started riffing on, life, dates, Hinge. I was asking all the usual questions. How long have you been on Hinge? How's it been for you? The kind of like soft interrogative questions everyone asks to gauge compatibility. And then something crazy happened. We achieved full transparency. In the sense, he admitted very politely and for clarity that he's dating around because that's where his life stage is at. And I paused. Why did I pause? I think because it just seemed so revelatory for someone to be so upfront. And just to clear things up, this was on Hinge, not Tinder or some other app where you swipe right with anything with the pulse. This was Hinge, where we're all looking for something a little more meaningful, or at least that's what we tell ourselves as we scroll through endless profiles of people who all seem to love hiking and dogs and sharing photos of the fish they just caught. It blew my mind because I think it felt just so oddly respectful in its promiscuousness. Because what are we all doing? Like, are we pretending that we're not chatting or going to drinks with multiple people? Are we meant to pretend that we are? And then he said, and it's totally cool if you date around too. It's only fair. And I looked like that meme of Miss J. Alexander from Top Model, looking shocked, clutching my pearls. And oddly enough, all this loose, slutty thoughtfulness made me cool with the idea. But the question was, are my other matches on Hinge cool with it too? I did a little litmus test of my girlfriends who are on Hinge. And they all said that yes, they speak to multiple people, but a gray area revealed itself when I asked, okay, but do you date multiple people at once? So I went to my Hinge matches for the guys' take on it. And the results were very interesting. 3 people didn't mind me asking. But shout out to the one guy who was super lovely, but also told me to basically fuck off because he thought we had something special. And we hadn't met in person yet, but we had exchanged a few voice notes. He did message me the day after saying that, and that he was sorry. He was in a really bad mood because he'd had a bad date the night before. To which I wanted to reply, so you are dating multiple people? But I didn't. I apologize because it is a really weird question to ask and I don't blame him. It is a fucking jungle out there and not everybody wants to be exploited for a podcast, so completely fair enough. But it turns out 3 guys were amazing and down with educating the public. I should just flag here, this whole episode isn't a flex like, ooh, look at all my Hinge matches, because people, if you're a woman presenting on Hinge, you're going to get matched. So yeah, it's not like a flex. And yes, I asked everybody's permission before sharing the voice clips that I am going to play. All their names have been changed. One even has had his voice changed at his request, which I was only too happy to oblige because I am very grateful for his take on this. Okay, let's get into it. So, dating, multiple people, ethics, love, sex. I wanted to know more. So I went to the guy who started all of this. Let's call him Drew. Drew is 34, good looking, a leader in his field, and by all accounts, seems like a really great guy. And I mentioned his age specifically because I wondered if that played a part in his approach. But anyway, Drew's reasons for his stance are actually pretty sensible. He travels a lot for work, he's going overseas, he doesn't even know if he's going to move interstate or not, so it kind of all makes sense. But I asked him how this approach works from his perspective. Like, do we, as in a collective we, as in everyone, do we go to coffee with one person, dinner with another? Is it like The Bachelor? And here's what he had to say.
I sort of have done it or do it. I think the trick is not the trick. I think what I find works the best is you kind of just gotta not over promise anything. Make sure you do what you're saying when you're seeing people. Finding the right time to have the expectation management conversation is sometimes a bit tricky. You know, you don't want to find yourself in the "what are we" conversation, because that's a bit painful. So usually up top, being pretty transparent without being dismissive.
And that all sounded pretty good. Fair enough. But then I asked, what about the women? Are you cool if your Hinge matches date multiple people too?
I get the feeling it's probably considered more acceptable for women to date multiple dudes at once, just with the perceived social, I don't like using this phraseology, but it seems to be something that people come back to. It's this sort of power slash I don't know, imbalance that, if a dude is dating lots of people at the same time, it's kind of like, oh, he's kind of a piece of shit. Whereas, if a woman is dating multiple people at the same time, she's sort of, I think, fairly seen to be just keeping her options open and keeping people at arm's length. And I think it's a pretty hostile dating environment for women. I don't know. I think if everyone's kind of on the same page, which you unfortunately kind of need to figure out without being super explicit sometimes, I think it's just about an up-top conversation and then not overreaching, not spreading yourself too thin, being pretty honest with people if anything comes up. It can be done. It can be done. It should be done. You should do it.
And I was like, wow, that is actually a very equal and emotionally aware approach to dating. But, of course, we have to talk about that great conundrum maker, sex. And here's what he said.
I think sex while you're dating multiple people is also fraught with some challenges, like expectation management, similar to just socially seeing people and making sure that you're clear with people is important. I think one of the good things about dating in adulthood and in your 30s is, everyone's a lot more prepared to just be sensible and conscious of things like something as simple as, having protected sex, which I think is something that particularly men try and get around in their youth, which is obviously problematic. And then I think if you're finding yourself with someone who's not prepared to engage in that in adulthood, then you just get rid of them anyway. But I think that's an important principle.
So that was Drew, the guy who started this whole episode. But this is science, right? And I needed more data. So I headed to another match of mine who also had sort of a mates and dates approach to Hinge. Let's call this one Craig. Craig is 41, so a little bit older than Drew, but he had a similar take on it. And without giving away too much, Craig has been ultra successful and is now sort of living a more chill life. He's also fresh out of a relationship. So I asked him the why and how of his approach to dating multiple people. And just to let you know, Craig asked me to change his voice a little bit. So that's why he sounds like he's on a current affair. But don't judge him for that. He is, by all accounts, a lovely human being.
I have/do date multiple people. So currently I've taken a step back from that. I currently have one situation that I can give you more details about. But basically, my story is that I have a lot of Hinge matches, and I use other apps as well. And just what I've learned from the apps is that basically I feel like for me, I have to you have a lot of matches because a lot of times it's, as I'm sure you know, you get people that are unresponsive or people that you don't vibe with or whatever. So it's kind of your percentage of matches versus people you actually vibe with and get along with and then meet is very different. But it's funny because in my particular case, I think I feel a little bit overwhelmed by dating and stuff. So I've taken a step back a little bit and because I was, in a relationship for 17 years. So I was just basically a kid when I connected with my now ex-wife. So I'm still trying to figure out all of the etiquette, and I personally don't really see a problem with this. I've got it stated on my profile that I'm not interested in a relationship. So straight out of the bat, that's the vibe I have on my profile, mates and dates, not ready for a relationship. So I feel like I kind of people know from the start what they're getting. I don't really see a problem with dating multiple people, at least on a kind of first date, second, third date basis, because you just don't know. And / is it their business? I don't know. It's kind of a fine line for me between privacy, but also wanting to be as transparent as possible.
Again, I reiterate, I apologize for the ominous sounding voice. Craig is not like that, the way he sounds. He's really funny and great and charming. But it all makes sense, especially if you've been stuck in a relationship for a really long time. But I needed to ask, what are the rules for him and his dates? Are there rules? What about sex?
I'm still trying to figure out all of the etiquette and, everything around dating and sex and everything. This is kind of a whole new frontier for me. I feel like I'm in a pretty good place about it, but it's just tricky. I just want to be extra sure that, everything's fully consensual and fully communicated and transparent. And there have been a couple of things that have come up where it's maybe I don't have this figured out yet, and maybe I should take a little break and kind of reassess. So it's an interesting time.
So far, transparency is in. Monogamous dating seems to be out, at least according to the mid-30s, early 40s crowd. But everyone seems really respectful about it, which is what I think everybody wants. The fascinating part for me was when I put the question to people who didn't really get behind the whole multiple dating thing. As I said earlier, one guy was literally angry that I even put the concept forward. But mostly, the naysayers' responses were along the lines of, yeah, it sounds like a healthy approach in theory, but in actuality, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't want to try to pull it off. And interestingly, that answer was from the youngest of my matches, Patrick, who's 29, runs multiple businesses, is a pretty good-looking guy, and who I just naturally assumed would be more promiscuous because he's in his 20s. But here's his take.
I think if you clearly communicate with whoever you're dating that's what your intention is, and they're happy and comfortable with that, and they actually mean it when they say that, then that's great. And as long as there's clear, open lines of communication as it progresses with where things are at and perhaps where things are at with other people they're dating, that makes it all okay. I guess it kind of turns your own life into an episode of The Bachelor or Bachelorette, which starts to sound, I think about it, a little bit stressful. As much as I'm okay with the idea of it, I've never dated multiple people at once myself. I've definitely been speaking to people at the same time, but they're actively going out on dates. I'm not sure who has the time to do that with multiple people, but yeah, good on them. Perhaps they should write a time management book. So yeah, I think it could be dangerous in that you'd fall in a trap of this kind of constant comparison.
So we have a theme. And it's interesting that people seem very willing to provide honesty and transparency and respect if they're living a more plural dating life. It seems to be when people get caught up in the feigning of monogamy in the dating phase, a period when everything is grey and nobody's locked into anything with anyone, that things get weird. And I say this as someone who has at various times felt that little twinge of, when you notice the guy you're chatting to follows another girl after you on Instagram. It's kind of like in your face. You know it's happening. And guys, don't side-eye me right now for saying that. There is not a millennial or younger person on the planet who hasn't sussed out the object of their attention's following. But that is for another episode. So this is the point where I ask you for your thoughts. How do you feel about dating multiple people? Is the world your own little episode of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette? Leave me a voicemail at selfcare-ish.com.au and let me know your thoughts on it. And also, who do you think had the best take on it? Drew, Craig, or Patrick? Who wins? Or does nobody win? And are we all just doomed to a life of meaningless, shallow sexual encounters? I'll share your takes next week. Also next week, we're shifting gears back to monogamy. To get serious for a sec, I recently had feedback from someone who said, I love what you're doing. Divorce is great, but what about celebrating the couples who have overcome challenges and found the strength to stay married and find themselves within their relationship? When do they get any love? And I realized until now that I hadn't really heralded that as an option. So I interviewed my two friends, Blake and Ryan. Now, I know you're probably like, who are these people? Are they experts in the field? Well, actually, yeah. Blake and Ryan, and these are not their real names, have overcome infidelity, or a form of infidelity, one that I think is pretty common, the emotional affair, which I think is actually more annoying than your partner having this steamy affair with a literal block of cement, like something concrete you can hang your hat on. Emotional affairs are so wishy-washy. They're so full of vibes and subjectivity. They can make anyone question their sanity. It's like trying to capture a fart in a jar. It's just impossible sometimes. But that's as far as I know, but we're going to get more into it. We're going to cover the self-carishness that comes with repairing, preserving, and keeping a love that's been fractured, rebuilding your marriage from the inside out, and finding your true self on the other side. I'll try and keep it relatively light, but there's no guarantees. This will probably be a pretty heavy episode. But anyway, thank you for listening. Again, leave us a voice note at selfcare-ish.com.au, and I'll chat to you next week.